Just to prove the book works, I changed. Getting a little silly here in the studio, Katy, but welcome to be.hive. I'm really excited to have you,
I'm excited
and excited to dive right in. So in addition to authoring the book, How to Change, you are a professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. You are the host of one of my favorite podcasts, Choiceology, and you are the co-director of the Behavior Change for Good initiative at Penn, where you guys are conducting mega studies, which is the coolest research term I can think of, to apply behavioral science to improving lives. So I want to start by asking you a question about that. You know, a lot of applied behavioral science work, and I think that includes a lot of the stuff that you guys are doing at Behavior Change for Good, is focused on sort of helping individuals overcome barriers to change where the impacts sort of directly benefit them. How are things that we're thinking about, like climate change and pollution, different? Does this stuff work when the benefits aren't so immediate or obvious to the individuals we're trying to help change?
Yeah, it's a terrific question. I do think the nature of the problem is different in really important ways that we have to think carefully about when we try to take an insight that works to encourage, say, retirement savings or exercise. We like to think that those same insights could be portable to tackling issues related to climate change. But even though they have delayed returns, the returns are largely to the individual, right? Like you have to wait a while to get the benefits of exercise, and you know, some of them are immediate, that great rush, but a lot of them are delayed. Same with retirement savings, but it might be a generation before there's real benefit in terms of climate change. So that creates new challenges. I think it means we need to do even more work that looks at research on influence rather than just research on bridging time when it comes to understanding your future self and your future needs. That's a lot of what the work in these other domains is about, and that isn't enough in this space.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's clearly seems like an area where we kind of got to suss out those differences. Kind of building on that, so you know, in addition to being a researcher and a teacher and a mentor and all these other things, you know, you have all these ways in your career of kind of applying your sort of cutting edge research to real stuff, right? And I think that's really something different. You know, how do you think about the sort of like different skills and even priorities that you need to have as a researcher for applying this stuff like in the wild?
Yeah, it's a great question. Honestly, I have always been interested in being outside of the ivory tower when it comes to my research. I never wanted to do work that was simply trying to understand a phenomenon in the way that sort of traditional theorists might want to understand. I've always been motivated by applied problems. So I'd actually say the challenge has been sort of the opposite of what you just described. So for my career, the challenge has been, how do I figure out, if I want to solve an applied and important problem, how to make sure that it contributes in some way to academic knowledge. But I always start with the problem personally. Something like, you know, how do we get people to recycle more? How do we get people to support a different kind of tax system? Or how do we get people to drive more energy efficient cars? Once I know I care about that end goal, then I spend a lot of time unpacking it, which is sort of what maybe a consultant would do, or you know, what many members of this organization might think about. And for me, then the challenge is, okay, what is going to be the academic contribution, and how do I make sure that what I'm doing is theoretically novel and generalizable? So I spent a lot of time thinking about that and like how to tie the work to insights from other scholars. But I always am motivated by the fundamental problem and by solutions that feel interesting and sort of come from the reading I've done of the academic literature, but a little bit of a twist or something new.
That's great. So, you know, I believe you're a tennis player yourself, and tennis is a big theme in the book too. You talk a lot about the famous tennis player Andre Agassi and some of his journey to becoming great. And you talk about sort of the focus on understanding your opponent and how he had to learn about understanding his opponent. In fact, you say one-size-fits-all strategies won't get you nearly as far as tailored attacks on what stands in your way. And I think it's fair to say at the same time that in applied behavioral science, there's a tendency or there's a temptation to kind of see one-size-fits-all strategies, everywhere you look. So, like when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. How do you think about overcoming that challenge? How do you know whether it's temptation bundling or timely reminders or fresh start effect or any of these other things in a real world situation?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question and brought up that piece of the book, because I think, it's the most important message I hope people who read it or listen to this conversation will take away, is that I think it's a huge mistake made too often by applied behavioral scientists, is just to say, oh, let's slap some social norms on this problem. Let's tell people, everybody's doing it. Bob Cialdini proved that worked. And Bob Cialdini did prove that worked, and social norms are incredibly powerful in most contexts, but it's not always the best solution, because the problem doesn't always have to do with my beliefs or perceptions of what the norms are, my discomfort with doing something that might feel unusual. Sometimes the barrier is forgetting. And so, even believing everyone in the world is doing it isn't going to get me to actually remember to take out, my recycling on the right date and actually comply with my intention if I don't get that reminder. So I think we actually spend too little time on that diagnosis part of a problem whenever we see a behavioral issue and we feel like we can use behavioral science to make an impact, rather than just looking to sort of our hit list of all the things that we know can work. I think it's really important to engage in understanding the why. What are the barriers? Interviewing the people who are not engaging in the behavior to try to figure out what are the pain points. Is it miserable? Are they forgetting? Is it too, costly, literally in terms of expense, not misery, but pain of paying? Is it habits that need to be broken? What is it? And once we understand that, we really do actually have the toolkit that we're used to going to as a list. We can divide it up and say different tools in this kit solve different problems particularly well, right? So social norms are great when you have a misconception about beliefs. Reminders are great when you have a forgetting issue. Trying to find ways to make things more fun, gamify them, and so on. That can be really important when there's an element of misery to engaging in the activity and there are delayed rewards. So you need to actually find a way to make the moment of engaging in it more enjoyable. So I actually think we have a lot of the answers already on that playlist we go to so often, but too often we just grab at willy-nilly from the grab bag of solutions instead of doing this matching process.
Yeah, well, building on that, one of the things I love about the book is how you organize it, not around kind of what that hit list is, but actually around what some of those like really fundamental barriers or problems are. So even like the chapter titles are things like forgetfulness and procrastination and some of these, these demons that we all have. So I think you're really kind of orienting even at that level toward what is the thing that we're trying to solve for? Why do we need this, this particular tactic? So you and I got to know each other really a few years ago in the before times in Chicago when we were on a panel together, sort of kind of debating different ways of thinking about tackling climate change. And the panel was moderated by the journalist David Wallace Wells, the author of the book The Uninhabitable Earth, which sort of paints a really grim picture of what the future of life on our planet is for our species in the context of a changing climate. And I dare say a pretty overwhelmingly grim picture for I think a lot of people. You talk in the book a lot about the theme of confidence and expectations, and that's really interesting in the context of this, these sort of big, hairy, seemingly intractable challenges like pollution, like climate change, et cetera. So, how do you think about the lessons that you're talking about from your research and your colleagues' research, and informing how we think about these really big, grim challenges?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do want to say, I think authors like David do a huge service, of course, by painting these grim pictures and showing us the dangerous path that we're on, to make sure that it's vivid and we understand how urgent it is to make a change, and painting that human picture of what could come. So that, all the behavioral science research says that is important. But as you point out, okay, that gets us motivated. That grabs our attention. It makes us realize, oh my gosh, we have to do something. But the next problem is what? And if it's such a daunting problem, we may just feel, oh, there's nothing I can really do. Maybe I'll vote differently, but I don't see how I personally can make a dent in this issue. And that's the confidence issue. So I think we have this extra challenge, because in order to motivate the kind of broad action we need people to take, we have to paint that picture. And then at the same time, we need to make it feel that individuals can do something. So they will, so that people will collectively stand up and take the actions they can and change their lives in the way that are feasible to make progress. I actually think some of the work that's most relevant to this is work by Al Bandura, who recently passed away, the great Stanford psychologist, who thought about how important it is to break down big goals into component parts that are bite-sized, so that we can actually see progress and see a way that we can make incremental achievements on a time scale that's feasible, right? So if you have a 10-year goal for everyone on planet Earth, that's really hard. But what should each individual do on a weekly basis? Should they is there something that each individual can be given to do as a goal on a weekly basis? And the more specific, the better, right? So it could be, make sure that you don't, and this is one that I think, a lot of people joked about, but like, make sure you don't use a plastic straw this week. Okay, that's really bite-sized, probably too bite-sized, probably doesn't make a dent. Although, of course, the little things we do change our identity, they change our values, they change how we vote potentially. So maybe it's not so pathetic, but we could think about giving people a goal like that for a month, and then say, okay, now that should be a habit. Now here's your next monthly goal. Every week, I want you to cut out, one trip you would take in a car typically. That's your goal for this week. So I think if we can break things down, give people bite-sized goals, that's a really big way that we could help make this actionable and not feel so impossible in light of that grim picture that's been painted.
Yeah, I love so much of the stuff that you talk about on kind of the power of self-efficacy and sort of believing and having the confidence in it, in our ability to do these things, and parsing it out makes that so much more even plausible that we can feel that sort of self-efficacy. And it also, I think, helps us, to your earlier points, think about which barriers we're addressing with those component parts, right? So maybe in one case it's forgetfulness, in another it's procrastination, and so we end up being a lot more effective that way as well. Katy, I know you're in the midst of a whirlwind schedule, and we're so grateful to have you join us. And I really can't recommend the book and Choiceology enough, both favorites of mine. One of the great things about How to Change is just that it's written in a really accessible sort of way, talking about a lot of great research that you and your colleagues and students are doing, but written in kind of a really human and just page-turning way. So I really recommend it for all the folks out there. And I want to thank you again for joining us. And thank you for all the work that you're doing to actually apply your brilliant research to improving lives in the real world. Thanks a lot, Katy.
Thank you for having me and for all the kind words. And thank you for the important work you're doing to apply behavioral science to such important challenges. I appreciate it all.
Thanks.